Billionaire confronted his fiancée in anger, until their baby spoke and changed everything. Before we begin, write in the comments which city you are following this story from. And when you're done, leave your rating from 0 to 10. Oh, and don't forget to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now, enjoy every detail. The elevator doors closed with a soft whisper, sealing Colton Everhart into 47 floors of silence. His reflection stared back from the polished steel, golden hair slightly disheveled, navy blazer wrinkled from 12 hours of back-to-back meetings, and those piercing blue eyes that had intimidated countless boardrooms now carrying a weight that had nothing to do with quarterly projections. At 35, Colton commanded Everhart Aviation with the precision of a military general. Automated air transport was the future, and he was building it one strategic acquisition at a time. But tonight, as Seattle's city lights blurred past the elevator's glass walls, all he could think about was the cold dinner waiting at home, and the woman who had stopped looking at him the way she used to. Delaney. The penthouse doors opened to reveal their sprawling apartment overlooking Elliott Bay. The dining table was set, white porcelain plates, cloth napkins folded with the care only Delaney possessed, and 2 wine glasses catching the soft glow of the pendant lights above. But the food sat untouched, and the woman who had prepared it was nowhere to be seen. Colton loosened his tie, the fabric suddenly feeling like a noose around his neck. He could hear soft murmurs coming from their bedroom. Delaney's voice, gentle and melodic, probably reading to their son. At 12 months old, Finn was the only person in the world who still lit up when Colton walked into a room. He found them in the nursery adjacent to their bedroom. Delaney sat in the rocking chair, her long auburn hair falling like silk over her shoulder as she cradled Finn against her chest. She wore a cream sweater that emphasized her pale, freckled skin, and jeans that had seen better days, a far cry from the polished consultant who used to command her own boardrooms before Finn arrived. "You're home early," she said without looking up, her voice carrying the practiced neutrality of someone who had learned to guard her expectations. "I wanted to have dinner with my family." Colton's tone was softer than his usual executive bark, but even he could hear the underlying frustration. "The food's cold. I kept it warm until 8, then until 8:30. Delaney finally met his eyes, and he saw something in her green gaze that made his chest tighten. "Finn was hungry, and you weren't answering your phone. I was in meetings. You know how important the Meridian acquisition is. Everything's important to you, Colton." She stood carefully, settling Finn into his crib. The baby's dark hair, so much like his father's before the sun had lightened it, caught the soft nursery lighting. The question is whether anything's more important than everything else. Colton watched his son's tiny chest rise and fall, those perfect little fingers curled into fists. Finn looked peaceful in a way Colton couldn't remember feeling in months. When had he last sat in this chair? When had he last read those picture books stacked on the shelf? "I'm building something for him," Colton said quietly. "For both of you. The company won't tuck him in at night." Delaney moved past him toward their bedroom, and he caught the faint scent of her shampoo, something vanilla and warm that used to make him want to bury his face in her hair. "It won't teach him how to ride a bike or show up to his school plays. I'll be there for those things." She paused in the doorway, her back still turned to him. "Will you? Because lately being there means your body's in the room but your mind's in a meeting." The words hit harder than any hostile takeover bid he'd ever faced. Colton followed her into their bedroom, where the California king bed suddenly seemed vast and cold. Delaney began folding laundry, tiny onesies and receiving blankets that somehow made their problems feel both smaller and infinitely larger. "What do you want me to do, Delaney? Stop working? Let everything I've built fall apart? I want you to stop talking to me like I'm one of your employees." Her hand stilled on a pair of Finn's pajamas. "I want you to remember that I gave up my career to be here, to raise our son, and that doesn't make me less capable of having an opinion about our life." The silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant hum of Seattle traffic and Finn's soft breathing through the monitor. Colton loosened his tie completely, letting it hang around his neck like a surrender flag. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted, the words scraping his throat raw. "I know how to close deals and manage teams and solve problems with data and strategy. But this, us, I don't have a playbook for this." For the first time all evening, Delaney's expression softened. She set down the tiny pajamas and really looked at him, not at the successful CEO or the man who could buy her anything she wanted, but at the father of her child who looked as lost as she felt. "Neither do I," she whispered. "But I know it doesn't start with cold dinners and phones that go straight to voicemail." What would it take for them to find their way back to each other before it was too late? The morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting geometric shadows across the marble kitchen island where Colton sat with his laptop, already 3 emails deep into his day. Steam rose from his untouched coffee mug, a ceramic piece Delaney had bought from a local artist, back when she still believed in small gestures that might soften his edges. Delaney moved through the kitchen with practiced efficiency, preparing Finn's breakfast while her own piece of toast grew cold on the counter. She wore yoga pants and an oversized sweater that had once been Colton's, though he couldn't remember the last time she'd borrowed his clothes. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a messy bun, revealing the graceful curve of her neck, a detail that used to distract him during their morning conversations. "The Meridian team wants to move the presentation to Thursday," Colton said, not looking up from his screen. "I'll need to fly to Portland tonight." Finn babbled from his high chair, tiny fists banging cheerfully against the plastic tray. At 12 months, he was all curious dark eyes and infectious giggles, a perfect blend of his parents' best features, unmarked by the tension that had settled between them like fog. "That's 3 trips this month." Delaney wiped pureed banana from Finn's chin, her movements gentle despite the tightness around her eyes. "Your mother called yesterday. She wants to know when she can see her grandson again." Colton's fingers paused over the keyboard. Patricia Everhart's expectations were legendary in their social circle. Perfectly orchestrated family dinners, grandchildren who performed on command, and daughters-in-law who smiled through everything. He'd been shielding Delaney from most of his mother's pointed comments about their delayed wedding and Delaney's career hiatus. "I'll call her back when I'm in Portland." "She didn't call you, Colton. She called me." Delaney's voice carried a weariness that made him finally look up from his laptop. "Apparently, I'm supposed to understand that family obligations don't pause for business trips." The accusation hung in the air between them. Colton closed his laptop with more force than necessary, the sound sharp in the quiet kitchen. Outside their windows, Seattle was waking up, commuters hurrying toward the financial district, coffee shops filling with the pre-work rush, a world that moved at his pace. "My mother has opinions about everything, you know that. This isn't about your mother." Delaney lifted Finn from his high chair, settling him against her hip where he immediately reached for her hair. "It's about the fact that I spend my days explaining to everyone why you're not here. Your mother, my friends, even the pediatrician, who keeps asking where Daddy is during appointments." Colton stood, straightening his already perfect tie. At 6'2", he commanded rooms without effort. But in his own kitchen, facing the woman who had once looked at him like he could solve any problem, he felt suddenly small. The Portland deal could change everything for us. For Finn's future. Finn's future is happening right now. Delaney's voice cracked slightly and she cleared her throat as if angry at herself for the display of emotion. "This morning, yesterday morning, every morning when he wakes up looking for his father and finds just me," the words hit like a physical blow. Colton moved closer, close enough to catch that vanilla scent again, to see the faint shadows under her green eyes that spoke of nights spent soothing a teething baby while he worked late in his home office. "Delaney, I used to run strategy sessions for Fortune 500 companies," she continued, her voice steadying into something that sounded dangerously like resignation. "I negotiated million-dollar contracts before I could legally drink, and now I can't even negotiate 5 minutes of my fiancée's undivided attention." Finn chose that moment to reach toward Colton, his small hand grasping at air with the universal infant gesture that meant, "Pick me up." For a heartbeat, Colton hesitated. His suit was fresh from the dry cleaner, and babies were unpredictable creatures who cared nothing for Italian wool. But something in Delaney's expression, a flicker of hope mixed with challenge, made him step forward and gather his son into his arms. Finn immediately grabbed for his tie, gurgling with delight at this unexpected turn in his morning routine. "Hey there, buddy," Colton murmured, and for just a moment the sharp edges of his day seemed to blur. Finn smelled like baby shampoo and banana, innocent and trusting in a way that made Colton's chest tighten with something he couldn't name. Delaney watched them together, her expression unreadable. "He's getting his first tooth," she said quietly. "Lower front. I've been up with him for 3 nights running." The information landed like an indictment. 3 nights. Had he even noticed her exhaustion beyond registering that she seemed quieter than usual? "Why didn't you tell me? When?" The question was simple, but it carried the weight of all their recent miscommunications. "Between your calls with Tokyo and your emergency video conference, or maybe during dinner, when your phone buzzed 12 times in 20 minutes. Colton had no answer that wouldn't sound like another excuse. He bounced Finn gently, watching his son's face light up with pure joy at this simple interaction. When had holding his own child become such a rare occurrence? His phone buzzed against his hip. Then again, the familiar Pavlovian response kicked in, the urge to check, to respond, to stay ahead of whatever crisis demanded his immediate attention. But Finn was looking at him with those dark eyes so like his own, and Delaney was watching with an expression that suggested this moment might determine something important about their future. The phone buzzed a third time, and this time Colton didn't reach for it at all. The conference room on the 32nd floor buzzed with the controlled energy of executives who measured success in quarterly reports and market share percentages. Colton sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, his presence commanding even when his mind wandered to small hands reaching for his tie and the taste of banana on tiny fingers. The Portland acquisition puts us ahead of schedule by 18 months, his VP of operations was saying, slides clicking past on the wall-mounted screen. We're looking at a 40% increase in automated freight capacity. Colton nodded at appropriate intervals, but his phone, face down on the table beside his leather portfolio, seemed to pulse with unspoken messages. 3 missed calls from Delaney. No voicemails. That worried him more than if she'd left angry messages demanding he call back. Sir? Marcus Chen, his youngest board member, was looking at him expectantly. Your thoughts on the timeline? Push it back 2 weeks, Colton said, surprising himself with the words. Family considerations. The room fell silent. In 5 years of leading Everhart Aviation, Colton had never cited personal reasons for delaying a deal. His team exchanged glances. Subtle, professional, but he caught them anyway. Of course, Marcus recovered smoothly. We'll adjust the projections accordingly. An hour later, Colton stood alone in his corner office, 30 floors above the Seattle streets where normal people led normal lives with predictable schedules and weekend family barbecues. His reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows showed a man who looked successful by every measurable standard, yet felt like he was failing at the only test that truly mattered. His phone rang. Delaney's contact photo filled the screen, a candid shot from their vacation in Napa, back when she laughed easily and touched his arm when she talked, back when he still made time for weekend getaways and conversations that lasted past midnight. Hey, he answered, softer than his usual business tone. Finn's at the pediatrician. Her voice was tight, controlled in the way that meant she was holding back tears or anger or both. High fever since this morning. They think it's more than teething. The world tilted. Colton gripped the edge of his desk, expensive wood solid beneath his palm while everything else seemed to shift. What kind of fever? Have you tried? I've tried everything, Colton. The exhaustion in her voice cut through his instinct to problem solve. I called you 4 times. I needed you to meet us here and you were in meetings. Through his office windows, Seattle sprawled in all directions, a city he'd conquered through strategic partnerships and calculated risks. None of that expertise meant anything when faced with a sick 12-month-old and a woman who'd been carrying too much alone. I'm coming now. Don't. The word stopped him cold. Dr. Martinez is handling it. Finn's responding to the medication. But Colton? She paused, and he could hear the ambient noise of a medical office. Soft conversations, phones ringing, the mundane sounds of people dealing with real problems. I sat in that waiting room for 2 hours holding our sick baby and I realized something. His chest tightened. What? I realized I've been preparing for this. Mentally preparing to handle everything alone. The pediatrician appointments, the sleepless nights, the first words and first steps. I've been unconsciously accepting that you won't be there for any of it. The accusation hit like a physical blow, made worse by the quiet resignation in her voice. This wasn't anger. Anger he could fight, could argue against, could win through logic and determination. This was something deeper and more dangerous. Acceptance. That's not fair, Delaney. I'm building something for our family. No, you're building something for yourself, and you're using our family as justification. Her voice cracked slightly, the first real emotion breaking through her careful control. I used to think I was your partner. Now I feel like I'm just the woman who takes care of your son while you're busy becoming more successful. The silence stretched between them, filled with everything they weren't saying. Colton could hear Finn fussing in the background, probably tired and confused by the unfamiliar medical office with its antiseptic smell and bright fluorescent lights. I don't know how to be different, he said finally, the admission scraping his throat raw. It was the most honest thing he'd said in months, maybe years. I know. Her voice was almost gentle now, which somehow made it worse. But Colton, I can't keep waiting for you to figure it out. Finn can't wait. He's growing up right now, this minute, and you're missing it. Through the phone, he heard Dr. Martinez's voice calling Delaney's name, heard her murmur something about being right there. I have to go, she said. Finn needs his second dose of medication. Delaney, wait. I love you, she said quietly. But love isn't enough anymore. Not when it feels like I'm the only one fighting for us. The line went dead, leaving Colton alone in his glass office tower, surrounded by the monuments to his success and the growing certainty that he was about to lose the only things that truly mattered. Outside, Seattle hummed with afternoon traffic, but all he could hear was the echo of his son crying in a doctor's office while he sat 30 floors away, making deals that suddenly seemed meaningless. Colton's Maserati cut through Seattle traffic with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, but for once, speed couldn't outrun the weight settling in his chest. He'd left the Portland deal hanging, walked out of the most important meeting of the quarter, and his assistant's panicked voicemails were piling up like accusations on his phone. None of it mattered. The pediatric clinic's parking lot was nearly empty at 4:30, most families having collected their children and returned to the comfort of home routines. Through the glass doors, he could see Delaney in the waiting area, Finn sleeping against her shoulder while she stared at something on her phone. Even exhausted, even angry, she was beautiful in that effortless way that had first caught his attention across a boardroom 3 years ago. She looked up when he entered, surprise flickering across her features before settling into something more guarded. You came. Of course I came. He approached slowly, as if sudden movements might spook her into leaving. How is he? Ear infection. Common for his age, especially when teething. Delaney's voice carried the clinical detachment of someone who'd spent hours absorbing medical terminology while holding a feverish baby. Antibiotics twice daily for 10 days. Follow up next week. Colton reached toward Finn, then hesitated. His son looked so small against Delaney's cream sweater, dark lashes resting against flushed cheeks. One tiny fist curled around a strand of her auburn hair. Can I? She shifted carefully, transferring their sleeping son into his arms. Finn stirred but didn't wake, his body warm and trusting against Colton's chest. The weight of him, solid and real and completely dependent, made something crack open inside Colton's carefully constructed armor. I was in a meeting about market projections, he said quietly, more to Finn than to Delaney, arguing about timelines and profit margins while my son was sick. The words tasted bitter. What kind of father does that make me? The kind who doesn't know how to be anything else yet. Delaney's response wasn't cruel, but it wasn't comforting either. She gathered Finn's diaper bag, her movements efficient and practiced. Dr. Martinez wants to see him again if the fever doesn't break by tomorrow night. They walked to the parking lot in silence, Colton still holding Finn while Delaney managed everything else, the way she always did. Her Honda Pilot sat next to his Maserati like a visual representation of their different priorities, family practicality versus individual success. Follow me home, she said, not quite meeting his eyes, in case he wakes up confused. The drive through Seattle's afternoon traffic gave Colton too much time to think. In his rearview mirror, he could see Delaney's silhouette, competent and self-contained in the way that used to attract him, but now felt like a wall between them. When had she stopped needing him? When had she learned to navigate their life alone? Back in their penthouse, Delaney moved with the quiet efficiency of someone accustomed to managing crisis without backup. She prepared Finn's medicine, checked his temperature and settled him in his crib with the kind of maternal instinct that seemed both natural and hard-earned. He should sleep for a few hours, she said, adjusting the monitor on Finn's dresser. The fever broke an hour ago, but Dr. Martinez said that's normal with the medication. Colton lingered in the nursery doorway, watching her straighten already organized baby clothes and check the nightlight that cast gentle stars across the ceiling. Everything in this room spoke of love and attention, from the carefully chosen mobile above Finn's crib to the rocking chair where she'd spent countless nights soothing their son while Colton worked late. Delaney. Her name came out rougher than he intended. I canceled the Portland trip. She paused, a onesie halfway folded in her hands. For tonight? For good. I called Marcus from the car, told him to handle the entire negotiation. The admission felt like stepping off a cliff. I told him family emergencies take precedence. That's not sustainable, Colton. She resumed folding, her voice carefully neutral. You can't run a billion-dollar company by emergency response. Maybe I can't run it the way I have been. Finally, she looked at him directly, Her green eyes held exhaustion and something that might have been the faintest flicker of hope, quickly suppressed. One crisis doesn't change a pattern that's been building for months. Then let me change the pattern. How? The question was simple, but it carried the weight of every broken promise, every missed dinner, every time she'd handled their life alone while he conquered the business world. How do you change being someone who measures worth by quarterly reports and market dominance? He didn't have an answer, not one that would sound like anything more than another well-intentioned promise destined to crumble under the pressure of the next big deal. But Finn stirred in his crib, making the soft sounds that meant he was settling deeper into sleep, and Delaney's expression softened as she watched their son. In that moment, Colton saw clearly what he stood to lose, not just the woman he loved, but the family they'd built together, the quiet moments that no amount of professional success could replace. I don't know how, he admitted, but I know I can't lose you, either of you. Delaney's hands stilled on the baby clothes, and for a heartbeat the walls between them seemed thinner than they'd been in months. 3 days passed like a delicate ceasefire. Colton worked from home, his laptop stationed at the kitchen island where he could hear Finn's laughter echoing from the living room and catch glimpses of Delaney moving through their space with that graceful efficiency he'd forgotten to appreciate. The Portland deal sat in limbo, his team sending increasingly urgent emails that he answered in measured, deliberate intervals instead of his usual immediate responses. Finn's fever had broken completely, leaving behind a more energetic version of their son who seemed determined to explore every corner of the penthouse. Delaney followed his adventures with the patient vigilance of someone who'd learned that 12-month-olds could find danger in the most innocent objects. He's faster than he was last week, Colton observed, watching Finn cruise along the coffee table with determination that reminded him uncomfortably of himself in hostile takeover negotiations. They change daily at this age. Delaney settled beside him on the sectional sofa, close enough that he could catch that vanilla scent from her hair, but maintaining the careful distance that had become their default. Yesterday, he figured out how to open the lower cabinets. I had to buy safety latches for everything. I should have helped with that. You were on a call with Singapore. The casual observation stung more than any accusation might have. She wasn't keeping score, just stating facts that highlighted how many moments he'd missed while managing time zones and market fluctuations that would be irrelevant in 20 years. Finn abandoned the coffee table in favor of his current obsession, the cabinet containing Delaney's collection of ceramic serving bowls. His small fingers worked determinedly at the safety latch, brow furrowed in concentration that was purely his father's genetic contribution. Persistent little guy, Colton murmured, moving to sit on the floor beside his son. Finn immediately crawled toward him, using Colton's crossed legs as leverage to pull himself upright. The trust in that simple gesture, the assumption that Daddy would provide steady support, made Colton's chest tighten with something between gratitude and guilt. He missed you, Delaney said quietly. The first 2 days you were traveling, he kept looking toward the door around 6:30, your usual arrival time. The information hit like a physical blow. His son had learned his schedule, had anticipated his presence, and Colton had never even noticed the pattern of expectation and disappointment playing out in their home. How many things have I missed? He asked, not sure he wanted the answer. Delaney was quiet for so long he thought she might not respond. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of accumulated solitude. His first time sitting up unassisted, the day he figured out how to clap. Last week he started waving bye-bye, but only when he hears your car in the garage. Each milestone landed like an indictment. Colton had built his career on meticulous attention to detail, on knowing every variable that could affect his company's success. Yet he'd been blind to the small daily victories happening in his own home. Finn babbled something that sounded suspiciously like da-da-da, though Delaney had warned him that babies often practiced sounds without meaning. Still, hearing those syllables in his son's voice made something primitive and protective surge in Colton's chest. Talk to me, Colton said, addressing Finn directly but catching Delaney's surprised expression in his peripheral vision. Tell me about your day. Did Mama read you the book about the truck? Did you practice walking while I was pretending that quarterly projections mattered more than this? Finn responded with an enthusiastic string of nonsense syllables, tiny hands patting Colton's face with the kind of unconditional affection that adults spent lifetimes trying to recapture. For 20 minutes they sat on the living room floor, father and son engaged in a conversation that made no logical sense but felt more important than any boardroom negotiation Colton had ever conducted. The coffee's getting cold, Delaney said eventually. But she made no move to leave her spot on the sofa, watching them with an expression that was carefully neutral, but warmer than anything he'd seen from her in weeks. Let it get cold. You never let coffee get cold. You reheat it 3 times rather than waste a cup. Maybe I'm learning that some things are more important than efficiency. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, just loaded with the weight of possibilities neither of them was ready to name. Finn continued his exploration of Colton's face, tiny fingers tracing his jawline with scientific curiosity, and Delaney continued watching from the sofa, as if cataloging evidence of some fundamental shift she wasn't sure she believed yet. Outside their floor-to-ceiling windows, Seattle moved through its afternoon rhythm, but inside their penthouse, time seemed suspended in the space between what they'd been and what they might become. His appointment tomorrow is at 10:30, Delaney said finally. Dr. Martinez wants to check his ears one more time. I'll drive, Colton said without hesitation, then caught himself. If you want me to. For the first time in days, weeks maybe, Delaney smiled. Small, tentative, but real. I'd like that. Dr. Martinez's office smelled like antiseptic and those rainbow-colored bandages that made shots less terrifying for toddlers. Colton sat in a chair clearly designed for someone smaller, his knees nearly touching his chest while Finn explored the examination room with fearless curiosity. Everything was lower than adult height. Sinks, examining table, even the cheerful animal posters that lined the walls. Ears look perfect, Doctor, Martinez announced, removing the tiny otoscope from Finn's ear. At 12 months, Finn had learned that medical instruments weren't threats, but interesting toys that adults held with mysterious reverence. Infections completely cleared. You can stop the antibiotics after tonight's dose. Delaney released a breath she'd been holding since they'd arrived. And the fever? Any chance of it returning? Very unlikely. He's a healthy boy. Doctor, Martinez smiled at Finn, who responded by clapping his hands with delight. Growing beautifully, right on track for his age. Colton found himself leaning forward, suddenly hungry for details he'd never thought to ask before. What should we expect developmentally? Milestones coming up? Walking independently, probably within the next month. More words. He might start combining sounds into recognizable language. And separation anxiety often peaks around this age. Dr. Barr. Martinez glanced between them. Is he in daycare or does he stay home with Mom? Home with me, Delaney answered, and Colton caught the slight emphasis on me that spoke volumes about their current division of labor. Good. Consistency helps with the anxiety phase. Some children become clingy when parents travel frequently or work irregular hours. The observation hung in the air like an unspoken accusation. Colton shifted in the too-small chair, watching Finn investigate a box of tissues with scientific thoroughness. His son seemed secure enough, happy, curious, engaged with the world around him. But what damage was accumulating beneath the surface of those dark eyes that looked so much like Colton's own? 20 minutes later, they stood in the parking lot outside the medical building, Finn strapped into his car seat and babbling contentedly at the toys hanging from its arch. The afternoon was unusually warm for Seattle in November, golden light filtering through clouds that promised rain later. Lunch? Colton asked, the word coming out more tentative than he'd intended. There's that place on Pine Street you used to like, the one with the good soups. Delaney hesitated, keys halfway to her ignition. I should get Finn home for his nap. He seems pretty alert. Maybe another hour? Colton moved closer to her car, close enough to see the faint shadows under her eyes that spoke of too many nights handling everything alone. When's the last time you had a meal that wasn't eaten standing up in the kitchen? The question seemed to surprise her. She looked at him as if trying to determine whether this was genuine interest or another item on his mental checklist of husbandly obligations to fulfill. Tuesday, she said finally. I think it was Tuesday. The admission hit him like a physical blow. Tuesday, 5 days ago. While he'd been attending business lunches with clients who could afford to charge $50 for fish that probably cost $5 to prepare, the mother of his child had been surviving on whatever she could grab between caring for their son and maintaining their household. Delaney, don't. She held up a hand, but there was no anger in the gesture, just exhaustion. Don't apologize again. Don't promise to be different. Just, if you want to have lunch, let's have lunch. The restaurant was nearly empty between the morning coffee rush and the dinner crowd. They chose a table by the window where Finn could watch pedestrians hurry past on the sidewalk while they waited for their food. He seemed fascinated by the rhythm of city life, pointing at dogs being walked, clapping when a city bus rumbled by, babbling commentary in his own private language. He likes people watching, Delaney observed, cutting her grilled cheese into manageable bites. Sometimes I bring him to the park just so he can watch other kids play. He's not quite ready to interact, but he studies them like he's taking notes. Gets that from you, Colton said. You used to do the same thing in coffee shops. Analyze people's behavior like you were building psychological profiles. I was building psychological profiles. That's what consumer research is. She smiled, and for a moment he caught a glimpse of the woman who'd once challenged his assumptions in boardroom presentations and won arguments through sheer intellectual persistence. I was good at it. You were brilliant at it. The compliment settled between them, carrying the weight of everything she'd given up when Finn arrived. They'd never discussed whether her career hiatus was temporary or permanent, just assumed, in that way couples do, that they'd figure it out as they went along. Do you miss it? Colton asked. The work? Finn chose that moment to launch a piece of banana across the table, landing it squarely on Colton's tie. Instead of frustration, Colton found himself laughing, the first genuine laugh he'd managed in weeks. Every day, Delaney answered quietly, wiping banana from Finn's fingers with practiced efficiency. But I wouldn't trade this, not for any client or campaign or corner office. She looked at Finn, then at Colton, and something in her expression shifted, softened in a way that made his chest tighten with hope and terror in equal measure. The question is whether you understand that this is the real work now. The call came at 11:47 on a Thursday night, piercing the quiet of their bedroom like an emergency siren. Colton fumbled for his phone, muscle memory from years of late-night crisis management kicking in before his brain fully engaged. The name on the screen made his stomach drop. James Morrison, chairman of the board. We've got a problem. Morrison's gravelly voice cut straight to business. The Meridian deal fell through. They're backing out, citing concerns about leadership stability. Apparently word got out about you walking away from Portland. Beside him, Delaney stirred but didn't wake. She'd been up twice with Finn, who was cutting another tooth and had decided that sleep was optional for everyone in the household. Her auburn hair spread across the pillow like spilled wine, and even in the dim light from his phone screen, he could see the exhaustion etched in the lines around her eyes. I'll be in the office in 30 minutes, Colton said, already throwing back the covers. Make it 20. The vultures are circling and Tokyo's threatening to pull their funding. This could cost us everything, Colton. Everything we've built. The line went dead, leaving Colton staring at his reflection in their bedroom window. Seattle's skyline glittering beyond like a constellation of possibilities that suddenly felt very fragile. Everything he'd built. The company that bore his family name. The empire he'd constructed deal by deal. The legacy he'd planned to leave for Finn. Movement in the bed caught his attention. Delaney was awake, watching him with those green eyes that had learned to read his moods like weather patterns. Emergency? She asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. The Meridian deal collapsed. James thinks it's connected to Portland, that I'm losing my edge, becoming unreliable. Colton reached for his clothes, the familiar ritual of crisis response taking over. The board's meeting in an hour. If I don't fix this, you'll lose the company. I'll lose everything. The words came out harsher than he'd intended. Weighted with panic he rarely allowed himself to feel. 20 years of work, Delaney. My father's legacy. Finn's inheritance. What about us? The question stopped him cold. He turned to find her sitting up in bed, her expression unreadable in the darkness. What? You said you'd lose everything. What about us? Are we part of everything, or are we the thing you lose when you go save everything else? The distinction hit like a physical blow. In the space of 30 seconds, he'd mentally categorized their relationship as secondary to the crisis, something to be managed after the real emergency was resolved. Again, that's not, Delaney, this is about our future, Finn's future. No. She stood up, pulling on the robe that had been draped over their bedroom chair. This is about your fear, your need to control every variable, manage every risk, except the one that matters most. From down the hall came the sound they both knew too well. Finn stirring, probably working up to a full cry as his gums throbbed and sleep refused to return. Delaney moved toward the door with the automatic response of someone who'd learned that maternal duty didn't pause for relationship discussions. I'll get him, Colton said, surprising them both. You deal with this. Go save your company. The dismissal in her voice was worse than anger. It was resignation wrapped in exhaustion, the sound of someone who'd stopped fighting because the outcome felt inevitable. Delaney, please. After I handle this crisis, there's always another crisis, Colton. Another emergency that's more important than dinner, more urgent than bedtime stories, more critical than the woman who's been holding your life together while you conquer the world. Finn's cries grew louder, more insistent. Down the hall, their son needed comfort that only his parents could provide, while in this room, the foundation of their family cracked a little wider. 5 years ago, you would have understood, Colton said, grasping for the woman who'd once shared his ambition, who'd celebrated his victories as if they were her own. You would have known that sometimes sacrifice is necessary for the bigger picture. 5 years ago, I didn't have a son who would grow up wondering why his father's phone was more important than his first words. Delaney's voice cracked slightly, the first real emotion breaking through her careful control. 5 years ago, I didn't know what it felt like to love someone so completely that watching you choose everything else over us was slowly killing me. The admission hung between them like a confession neither was ready to hear. Finn's cries reached a crescendo that demanded immediate attention, and Colton's phone buzzed with what was probably another urgent text from Morrison, or his assistant, or any number of people whose crises couldn't wait until morning. I have to go, Colton said, hating himself for the words even as he spoke them. I know you do. Delaney moved toward the door, toward their crying son and another night of handling everything alone. You always do. She paused in the doorway, silhouetted against the soft light from the hallway, and for a moment he thought she might say something else. Some words that could bridge the growing chasm between who they'd been and who they were becoming. Instead, she simply said, "Turn off the lights when you leave." And Colton stood alone in their bedroom, watching the numbers on his phone clock advance toward midnight, knowing that every second of delay might cost him his company, while every step toward the door might cost him something infinitely more valuable. Colton stood in the hallway outside Finn's nursery, his phone silent in his hand, listening to Delaney's soft voice drift through the partially open door. She was singing, something gentle and wordless that seemed to wrap around their son's diminishing cries like a lullaby made of pure comfort. His thumb hovered over Morrison's contact. 20 years of building, of proving himself worthy of his father's legacy, of creating something that would outlast his own mortality. The board was waiting. Tokyo was reconsidering. Every minute of delay was another nail in the coffin of everything he'd worked to achieve. "Shh, baby boy," Delaney whispered from inside the nursery. "Mama's here, it's just your teeth making you sad. It'll pass, sweetheart. Everything passes. But some things shouldn't pass," Colton realized with startling clarity. Some things were worth fighting to keep. He turned off his phone. The simple gesture felt monumental, like jumping from a cliff without knowing what waited at the bottom. 20 years of conditioning screamed against it. His father's voice, his own ambition, the weight of expectation and responsibility that had driven every decision since he'd graduated from business school. But when he pushed open the nursery door, the sight that greeted him made everything else fade into insignificance. Delaney sat in the rocking chair, Finn cradled against her chest, both of them illuminated by the soft glow of the night light that projected stars across the ceiling. She looked up when he entered, surprise flickering across her features. "I thought you'd left," she said quietly. "I should have." Colton approached slowly, as if sudden movements might shatter whatever fragile possibility hung in the air between them. "Morrison's probably having a stroke right about now. The board's waiting. Tokyo's threatening to pull out. But my son needed comfort, and my fiancé has been carrying this family alone while I played corporate warrior." He knelt beside the rocking chair, close enough to touch but careful not to assume that privilege. "And I just realized that I can rebuild a company, but I can't rebuild the trust I'm about to lose if I walk out that door." Finn had quieted to soft sniffles. His tiny fist curled around a strand of Delaney's hair in that way that meant he was settling back toward sleep. In the dim light, Colton could see his son's features more clearly than ever. The stubborn set of his jaw that was pure Everhart, the gentle curve of his mouth that was all Delaney, the dark lashes that had somehow managed to combine the best of both parents. "This could destroy everything I've built," Colton continued, his voice barely above a whisper. 20 years of work, my father's company, our financial security. And what happens if you save the company but lose us? The question hung in the starlit air, more profound than any boardroom negotiation he'd ever navigated. What did happen to a man who conquered the world but came home to an empty house? What was the point of building an empire if there was no one left to share it with? "I don't know," he admitted. "But I know I can't find out." For the first time in months, Delaney's smile reached her eyes. Your phone's been buzzing. I know. Morrison's probably panicking. Probably. The Tokyo deal could fall through completely. It might. Colton reached out tentatively, and when Delaney didn't pull away, he brushed a strand of auburn hair from her face. But deals can be rebuilt. Companies can be saved or replaced. There are other opportunities, other partnerships, other ways to measure success. And us? Her voice was so soft he had to lean closer to hear it. Can we be rebuilt? I'd like to find out. His thumb traced the line of her cheekbone, relearning the geography of her face in the gentle nightlight. If you're willing to let me try, really try this time. Finn stirred slightly, making those soft sounds that meant he was drifting back into deeper sleep. Delaney stood carefully, moving to settle their son in his crib with practiced ease. When she turned back to Colton, something fundamental had shifted in her expression. Walls that had been carefully constructed over months of disappointment beginning to lower. It's not going to be easy, she said. Learning how to trust you again. Learning how to believe that I'm more important than the next big deal. I know. There will be more emergencies. More crises that feel like the end of the world. I know. And I won't keep fighting for us alone. Not anymore. Colton stood, closing the distance between them until he could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes, until he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. Then we'll fight together. Starting now. His phone buzzed again, insistent and demanding. This time when he looked at it, he saw 17 missed calls and 43 unread messages. The corporate world was imploding, and he was standing in a nursery decorated with dancing elephants and soft yellow walls, choosing love over legacy. Are you sure? Delaney asked, following his gaze to the frantic phone screen. Colton looked at his sleeping son, at the woman he'd almost lost, at the life they'd built together in quiet moments between his endless meetings and international calls. Then he looked back at Delaney, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, the answer felt absolutely certain. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The morning light filtering through their bedroom curtains found Colton exactly where he'd fallen asleep, sitting in the chair beside Delaney's side of the bed, his phone finally silent on the nightstand, 17 missed calls transformed into a problem for tomorrow's version of himself. Finn had slept through the night for the first time in a week, and Delaney looked more peaceful than he'd seen her in months. She stirred as he watched, green eyes opening to find him still there, still choosing them over the corporate crisis that had surely escalated through the night. You stayed? She said, her voice soft with sleep and something that might have been relief. I told you I would. You've told me a lot of things. But there was no bitterness in the observation, just the cautious honesty of someone testing whether the ground beneath her feet had truly shifted, or if she was standing on another temporary patch that would crumble under the weight of the next emergency. Colton's phone buzzed once, a single, almost apologetic vibration. They both looked at it, then at each other. Aren't you going to check it? Delaney asked. Do you want me to? The question hung between them, loaded with more significance than any contract negotiation he'd ever navigated. This was the test, not the grand gesture of turning off his phone in the middle of the night, but the smaller, more difficult choice of staying present in the quiet morning moments when the crisis had had hours to grow into something that might truly be unsalvageable. I want you to stay more than you want to check it, she said finally. He reached for the phone, watched her face tighten with familiar disappointment, then deliberately placed it in the bedside drawer and slid it closed with a definitive click. There. Now I can't hear it even if I wanted to. The smile that spread across Delaney's features was like sunrise after the longest night of his life. Small, tentative, but undeniably real. From down the hall came the sound of Finn waking up, not the distressed crying of a teething baby, but the happy babbling of a child who'd slept well and was ready to explore whatever adventures the day might bring. I'll get him, Colton said, standing before Delaney could move. You stay here. Rest. Colton, you don't have to. I want to. And he did want to. The realization surprised him with its simplicity. He wanted to be the parent who responded to their son's morning sounds, wanted to be part of the routine that shaped their days, wanted to matter in the small moments that made up a life. Finn stood in his crib, gripping the rail with tiny hands, face lighting up with pure joy when he saw his father appear in the doorway. Dada, Dada, he babbled, the sound clear and intentional in a way that made Colton's chest tighten with pride and regret in equal measure. Hey there, buddy, Colton said, lifting his son from the crib. Sleep well? Finn responded with an enthusiastic stream of nonsense syllables that sounded like the most important conversation Colton had ever been part of. They moved to the kitchen together, Finn riding contentedly on his father's hip while Colton attempted one-handed coffee preparation with the kind of domestic inefficiency he'd never had to master. "You're getting good at that," Delaney said from the doorway, having followed the sound of their voices. She wore his old college sweatshirt and pajama pants, hair tumbling around her shoulders in waves that caught the morning light streaming through their kitchen windows. "I'm getting coffee grounds on everything that isn't the filter," Colton said, surveying the minor disaster he'd created in pursuit of caffeine. But Finn seems to think it's hilarious. Indeed, their son was giggling at each small mishap, clapping his hands when coffee grounds scattered across the counter like confetti. To a 12-month-old, inefficiency wasn't frustrating. It was entertaining. "He likes spending time with you," Delaney said, moving to rescue the coffee preparation with practiced ease. "He doesn't care if you're perfect at it. Maybe I should learn from that. Maybe we both should." They moved around each other in the kitchen with cautious choreography. Not quite the seamless partnership they'd once been, but not the careful avoidance that had characterized recent months either. Something new, tentative, but hopeful. Finn continued his commentary from his high chair, banging his sippy cup against the tray with rhythmic determination, while eyeing the pancake mix Delaney was pulling from the cabinet. "Pancakes on a Thursday?" Colton asked. "Why not? It's not like either of us has anywhere urgent to be." The statement was casual, but it carried weight. For the first time in years, Colton's schedule was completely open. Not by choice exactly, but by consequence of choosing something more important than maintaining perfect control over his professional obligations. His phone, safely contained in the bedroom drawer, was undoubtedly accumulating messages that would require attention eventually. The board would need explanations, Tokyo would need reassurances, and Morrison would need either his head or his resignation. But those problems belonged to a version of himself he was learning to leave behind. The man who believed that being indispensable to everyone else was more important than being present for the people who actually mattered. "Delaney," he said, watching her measure flower with the precision she brought to everything she cared about. "What would you think about me stepping back from day-to-day operations? Finding someone else to run things while I figure out how to be the kind of father Finn deserves?" She paused, measuring cup suspended mid-air, looking at him as if he'd just suggested relocating to Mars. "You'd do that? I'd do anything," he said, meaning it completely. "To keep this. To keep you. Both of you." The knock on their door came at 3:15 in the afternoon, sharp and insistent in the way that meant business couldn't wait for convenient timing. Colton was on the living room floor with Finn, building towers of wooden blocks that their son demolished with gleeful determination, when the sound cut through their peaceful afternoon like a blade through silk. Through the peephole, he could see James Morrison's familiar silhouette, flanked by two other board members whose presence meant this wasn't a casual check-in. The corporate world had come calling, and it wouldn't be ignored any longer. "Company," Colton said quietly, and Delaney looked up from her laptop where she'd been researching pediatric nutrition guidelines with the focused intensity she once reserved for client presentations. She saw his expression and understood immediately. How bad? Bad enough that Morrison brought witnesses. Finn continued his architectural destruction, oblivious to the tension suddenly filling their home. His laughter provided a strange counterpoint to the increasingly urgent knocking that echoed from the front door. "You could not answer," Delaney suggested, but they both knew that wasn't really an option. Eventually, the crisis would demand acknowledgement, and postponing the inevitable would only make it worse. "Better to face it now," Colton said, standing and brushing wooden block debris from his jeans. Designer denim that had cost more than most people's monthly salary, now decorated with baby drool and graham cracker crumbs. "While I remember why I chose this." He opened the door to find Morrison's face flushed with the kind of controlled fury that boardrooms bred in men who measured their worth by quarterly earnings. 36 hours, Colton. 36 hours without a word while your company imploded." Morrison pushed past him into the penthouse, taking in the domestic scene with barely concealed contempt. "Tokyo pulled out completely. The Meridian partnership is dead. Half the board wants your head and the other half wants your resignation." "James," Colton said calmly, closing the door behind the unwelcome invasion, "I'd like you to meet my family. The reason I chose not to answer your calls." Morrison's gaze swept over Delaney, beautiful even in casual clothes, clearly intelligent. Obviously the kind of woman who could have had any life she wanted. before landing on Finn, who had abandoned his blocks in favor of studying these new adults with scientific curiosity. "Charming," Morrison said, his tone suggesting anything but charm. "I'm sure they'll be very understanding when you're explaining why Daddy lost the family fortune because he couldn't prioritize properly." The words hung in the air like poison gas, designed to hit exactly where Colton was most vulnerable. For years, this kind of pressure had worked. The implication that his worth as a provider, as a man, was measured entirely by his ability to prioritize business over everything else. But something had shifted in Colton's internal compass, recalibrated by sleepless nights spent holding his son, and conversations with a woman who'd reminded him that love required presence, not just profit margins. "You're right," Colton said quietly. "I can't prioritize properly. That's why I'm stepping down as CEO, effective immediately." The silence that followed was so complete that Finn's babbling seemed explosively loud. Morrison's face went through several expressions: surprise, disbelief, calculation, before settling on something that looked like panic. "You can't be serious. The company is your father's legacy." "My father built a company," Colton interrupted. "But he also missed my first words, my first steps, most of my childhood birthdays. He died having conquered an industry but never having really known his son." He looked at Finn, who had crawled over and was now pulling himself upright using Colton's leg as leverage. "I won't make that mistake. This is financial suicide," Morrison sputtered. "You'll lose everything." "No." Colton reached down and lifted Finn into his arms, feeling his son's solid weight against his chest like an anchor to what truly mattered. "I'll lose some things. Money, probably. Status, definitely. The approval of people who measure success by stock prices and market share." He looked at Delaney, who was watching the scene with an expression he couldn't quite read, surprise mixed with something that might have been pride. "But I won't lose the chance to be the father my son deserves. I won't lose the woman who's been holding our life together while I chase deals that mean nothing if I have no one to share them with." Morrison's face had gone an alarming shade of red. "You're destroying 20 years of work. I'm choosing 20 years of life instead." Colton's voice remained steady, certain in a way that surprised even him. "The company will survive. You'll find new leadership, new investors, new deals. Business always continues." He bounced Finn gently, earning a giggle that seemed to physically pain Morrison. "But my son will only be this age once. My fiancée will only forgive me so many times for choosing work over love, and I've already wasted too many chances thinking I could have both without sacrificing anything." "This is insanity," Morrison said finally. "Pure emotional insanity." "Maybe," Colton agreed. "But it's my insanity, and it's the first decision I've made in years that feels completely sane." Morrison and his companions left in a cloud of threats about lawyers and buyout clauses, and financial ruin that would follow such reckless emotional decision-making. Their voices echoed in the hallway long after the door closed, warnings about a future without corporate security or generational wealth. In the sudden quiet of their home, Finn reached up and patted Colton's face with tiny hands, babbling something that sounded suspiciously like "Dada love," though Delaney had warned him not to read too much meaning into random syllables. "Are you sure about this?" Delaney asked quietly. "Walking away from everything you've built?" Colton looked around their penthouse. Expensive art on the walls, furniture that cost more than most cars, windows that showcased a city he'd helped shape through strategic investments and calculated risks. All of it beautiful, impressive, and suddenly much less important than the woman watching him with cautious hope, and the child in his arms who trusted him completely. "I'm not walking away from everything," he said. "I'm finally walking toward what matters." 6 months later, the small cafe on Pine Street hummed with the comfortable energy of neighborhood regulars and first-time visitors, discovering what locals had known for years, that sometimes the best conversations happened over imperfect coffee, served by people who remembered your name. Colton sat at their usual table by the window, watching Seattle's morning commuters hurry past while waiting for Delaney to return from the restroom. Finn, now 18 months old and walking with the determined confidence of someone who'd recently mastered the art of bipedal motion, stood beside Colton's chair, tiny hands pressed against the window glass as he provided enthusiastic commentary on the passing foot traffic. His vocabulary had exploded in recent weeks. Doggy and car and mama and dada, mixing with increasingly complex gibberish that suggested opinions about everything he encountered. "Truck," Finn announced with delight as a delivery vehicle rumbled past, and Colton found himself genuinely impressed by his son's growing ability to categorize the world around him. Good eye, buddy, Colton said, lifting Finn onto his lap where he could get a better view of the street theater beyond their window. What else do you see? 6 months ago, this moment would have been impossible. Not the logistics, he could have carved out an hour for coffee, could have brought his family to this cafe, could have sat still long enough to engage in toddler conversation about urban transportation. But the mental space for it, the ability to be fully present without his mind racing toward the next meeting or merger or crisis, demanding immediate attention, that had required a fundamental rewiring of who he was. The consulting firm he'd launched 3 months after leaving Everhart Aviation was smaller, more flexible, focused on helping family businesses navigate transitions without losing their souls to corporate machinery. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd become the person he'd needed when he was drowning in quarterly projections and board expectations. Sorry, Delaney said, sliding back into her seat across from them. There was a line, and then I got caught up talking to Sarah Martinez from Finn's playgroup about the new pediatric center opening in Belltown. She looked radiant in a way that had nothing to do with makeup or expensive clothes, though both were minimal these days, and everything to do with the settled contentment of someone whose life finally aligned with her values. Her auburn hair was shorter now, cut in a practical style that didn't require morning battles with hot tools, and she wore jeans and a sweater that had seen better days, but fit her life perfectly. Good news? Colton asked, bouncing Finn gently as their son investigated the fascinating world of sugar packets and napkin dispensers that made cafe tables endlessly entertaining to 18-month-olds. Great news. They're hiring part-time consultants to help design their family services program. Flexible hours, work-from-home options, and, she paused, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth, the kind of psychological research that actually makes a difference in people's lives. The announcement settled between them like a gift neither had dared to expect. Delaney hadn't talked seriously about returning to work since Finn's birth, though Colton had caught her reading industry publications with the focused hunger of someone whose mind craved challenges beyond diaper changes and nap schedules. That sounds perfect for you, he said, meaning it completely. When would you start? That's the beautiful part. Whenever I'm ready. They want someone who understands that family comes first, that real expertise comes from living what you're designing programs around. Finn chose that moment to escape his father's lap, in favor of exploring the fascinating textures of the cafe's mosaic tile floor, moving with the fearless curiosity that made parenting equal parts joy and terror. Delaney automatically shifted her chair to create a safe perimeter, while Colton crouched down to Finn's level, ready to intervene if their son's architectural investigations led him too close to other diners. Careful, buddy, Colton murmured, watching Finn pat different tiles with scientific thoroughness. We're guests here. He's fine, Delaney said softly. Let him explore. And there it was, the fundamental shift that had taken 6 months to fully understand. Delaney had learned to trust his presence, to believe that his attention wouldn't suddenly evaporate when his phone buzzed, or his mind wandered toward business obligations. He'd learned to trust the process, to understand that fatherhood was less about perfect control and more about present engagement. I have something to tell you too, Colton said, settling back into his chair while keeping one eye on Finn's tile expedition. Morrison called yesterday. Delaney's expression tightened almost imperceptibly, the reflex of someone who'd learned that business calls often preceded emotional distance. The board wants to buy out my consulting firm, he continued. Full acquisition, premium price, with an offer to return as CEO of the merged companies. The silence that followed was loaded with history, months of broken promises, missed dinners, and conversations interrupted by emergencies that had seemed more important than the people having them. What did you tell him? Delaney asked finally. I told him I was flattered by the offer, but I already have the only job that matters to me. Colton reached across the table, covering her hand with his own. Full-time father, part-time consultant, permanent partner to the woman who taught me the difference between building an empire and building a life. Finn had discovered that certain tiles made interesting sounds when tapped with sufficient enthusiasm, and his rhythmic percussion provided a soundtrack to their conversation that was infinitely more appealing than the corporate conference calls that used to dominate Colton's days. Are you sure? Delaney asked, her fingers intertwining with his. It's a lot of money. Security for Finn's future, for our future. Our future is happening right now, Colton said, echoing words she'd spoken to him months ago when he'd still believed that tomorrow's success mattered more than today's presence. This moment, this cafe, This conversation while our son discovers that tile floors make excellent drums. This is what I was missing when I thought I was building something important. Delaney's smile started small and grew until it illuminated her entire face. The kind of expression that had first caught his attention across a boardroom, but now meant something infinitely more valuable than professional attraction. "I love you," she said simply. "Not the CEO version or the consultant version or any other version you think you need to be. Just you. The man who sits on cafe floors and gets excited about toddler vocabulary and turns down million-dollar deals because he'd rather help me build something that matters. I love you too," he said, watching Finn attempt to share his tile discoveries with a patient golden retriever whose owner was clearly accustomed to 18-month-old admirers. "All of you. This life we're building together." Outside their window, Seattle continued its daily rhythm. Commuters rushing toward meetings that felt urgently important. Delivery trucks navigating traffic that would be forgotten by evening. The endless cycle of professional obligations that had once defined his entire sense of purpose. But inside the small cafe on Pine Street, time moved differently. Here, success was measured in shared glances and comfortable silences, in toddler laughter, and the quiet contentment of choosing love over legacy, presence over profit, family over everything else the world insisted was more important. What would you choose if you had to decide between everything you thought you wanted and everything that actually mattered? Thanks for watching. Your feedback is very important to our work, so please leave a comment telling us what you think and where you are watching from. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any stories. Your participation is very important for the continuation of our work, so please share this story with anyone who would love it too.